There is no shortage of admiration for India on the global stage. Western leaders praise its democratic values, multinational CEOs applaud its digital innovation, global institutions highlight its economic growth. Yet behind closed doors, a quieter truth emerges: for all the respect India receives, it is rarely rewarded with the influence, partnership, or trust that such respect implies. Why? Why is India, a democracy of 1.4 billion people, still treated with cautious distance, even suspicion, while smaller, authoritarian regimes are embraced with open arms? Why are India's strategic decisions scrutinized more intensely than countries with questionable human rights records or openly hostile foreign policies? At forums like the G20, India is hailed as a vital partner. At the UN, it's told how it should vote. In bilateral meetings, it's courted. But when India asserts its independence, on Ukraine, on oil imports, on its border policy with China, the applause fades into discomfort. Because admiration, it seems, is conditional. Respect is tolerated, but only when paired with compliance. India is the paradox the world can neither ignore nor control. And this paradox is not just diplomatic, it is psychological. Nations that followed the West's script were rewarded with praise and privilege. India wrote its own script. And while the world watches, it struggles to understand a country that does not look outward for validation, but inward for purpose. To understand this double standard, we must revisit an uncomfortable truth: the post-World War II order was built on control, not colonialism in its older form, but in a more sophisticated variant: control through dependency, debt, alignment, and ideological conformity. The West's closest allies are often those it can influence with ease. Nations reliant on aid, trade access, or military protection become predictable players in the global script. This is why countries like Pakistan continue to receive support despite destabilizing behavior. Since the early days of the Cold War, Pakistan has positioned itself as a strategic pivot. It offered access to Afghanistan, a watchpoint on Iran, and proximity to China. These coordinates, more than any values, earned it funding, weapons, and diplomatic shielding. Even today, Western intelligence and logistics operations often need a presence in Pakistan, not because of trust, but because of necessity. It's a partner born out of geography, not alignment. India, on the other hand, is the opposite. It is large, democratic, and increasingly self-reliant. It cannot be bullied with aid withdrawal, it does not trade loyalty for loans, it doesn't need approval to assert its interests. That makes India difficult to manage, and therefore, inconvenient. When India abstains at the UN, it is questioned. When it conducts border strikes in response to terrorism, it is advised to show restraint. When it engages with Russia, it is scrutinized. Meanwhile, less stable partners are handled with caution and compromise. In diplomacy, unpredictability is often punished. But in India's case, independence is misread as defiance. India is the inconvenient variable in an old equation. Consider defense partnerships. The US has long armed Pakistan, despite knowing that many of its weapons ended up in the hands of groups targeting Indian civilians and soldiers. Yet when India signs a missile deal with Russia, eyebrows are raised. India joins the Quad, it signs defense agreements with France, Japan, and the U.S. It participates in Indo-Pacific strategies. But it also maintains ties with Iran, imports discounted oil from Russia, and speaks regularly with the Chinese. This balancing act is not betrayal, it is sovereignty. And yet, Western media headlines often frame India as non-committal or uncooperative. The truth is more nuanced. India has chosen a foreign policy rooted not in Cold War binaries, but in its national interest. India's partnership with the United States, for example, has reached new heights: joint military exercises, critical and emerging technologies agreements, semiconductor and AI collaboration. But unlike junior partners, India negotiates as an equal, not as a subordinate. This is a significant shift from the post-colonial norm where the West often set the terms. That independence is seen as threatening because it resists easy categorization. In a world that prefers allies who nod before they speak, India insists on thinking first. India's strategic maturity lies in its refusal to be cornered. Perhaps nowhere is this hypocrisy clearer than in the differing standards applied to India and Pakistan. India is expected to be morally consistent. Its democracy is analyzed under a microscope, its domestic policies are dissected in foreign media. Its media freedom, its judiciary, its social fabric, all debated in Western capitals. Meanwhile, Pakistan receives security assistance while sponsoring proxy wars. It is treated as a partner in peace despite exporting conflict. When it acts recklessly, the world reacts with brief concern. When India acts in self-defense, the world lectures restraint. Why? Because one is expected to act responsibly. The other is expected to be managed. The paradox is painful. India, by being democratic and strong, is scrutinized. Pakistan, by being unstable and weak, is supported. It is not justice, it is geopolitics. And yet, India does not waver from its path. India's internal challenges, whether in managing diversity or economic inequality, are acknowledged by its own citizens. But unlike many of its critics, India is a functioning democracy where leaders are elected, laws are debated, and power transitions peacefully. This is a resilience not often afforded credit. India does not retaliate with noise. It responds with strategy. It builds new trade corridors with the Middle East and Europe. It launches its own digital public infrastructure that the world now studies. It partners with African nations on energy and agriculture. It expands BRICS while staying in touch with the West. This is not a passive power, it is quiet power. When the US courted Pakistan to fight terror, India invested in solar alliances. When Europe wavered on including India in critical supply chains, India quietly became the world's pharmacy during COVID. When alliances demanded conformity, India offered complexity. Strategic patience is not a weakness. It is a calculation. And India has mastered it. India's investments in long-term diplomacy, from the International Solar Alliance to the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, show a nation that plans not for the next headline, but the next decade. It is a long game, and India plays it well. The world often expects India to operate within an old moral framework of good versus evil, democracy versus authoritarianism, alignment versus opposition. But India's rise is not built on these binaries. It is built on a new vocabulary: interest without intimidation, cooperation without submission, influence without arrogance. India does not export ideology. It exports vaccines, software, satellites, and philosophy. It does not claim moral superiority. It practices pluralism under pressure. Its complexity is not a flaw. It is its strength. This frustrates traditional powers, because India does not fit the mold of a pliable partner or an ideological pawn. It is, instead, a sovereign civilization navigating modernity on its own terms. Its identity is older than most modern states, and its future brighter than most predict. India represents a new kind of power, one that leads not through domination, but through demonstration. Its soft power is rooted in culture, conduct, and coherence. While many nations are pulled into ideological blocks, India is quietly leading a third movement, not non-alignment, but multi-alignment. In 2024, at the Voice of Global South Summit in Delhi, India hosted over 100 countries. They discussed climate resilience, digital access, and food security. This was not a G7 meeting, nor a NATO forum. It was a platform built by India, for those often excluded from elite summits. India is helping African nations with infrastructure, Southeast Asia with digital governance, and the Middle East with energy transitions. Not with charity, but with cooperation. This leadership is not transactional. It is transformational. And the world is watching. India may not dominate headlines daily. But in capital after capital, its presence is growing. As the world grapples with new alliances, AUKUS, I2U2, BRICS+, Quad, India is present in each, yet bound by none. It does not limit itself to a single worldview. It integrates many. In a world that still rewards obedience, India chooses integrity. That choice may delay rewards. It may invite criticism. But in the long arc of history, it defines true power. Because the most powerful nations are not those with the largest arsenals or the loudest voices. They are the ones who can say no when it matters most. India is respected, but not rewarded. Not yet. But respect that comes from fear fades. Respect that comes from force fractures. Respect that comes from independence endures. And that is why, in this moment of shifting power, the world will learn something new. The nation that does not ask for validation is often the one most worth listening to. India doesn't need to be rewarded to stay the course. Because India doesn't follow power. It defines it. And in doing so, it may just redefine the global order itself.